The Young Girl by Katherine Mansfield. Welcome to MagicMingle, where we help you learn English through timeless stories from classic literature. Today, we're exploring The Young Girl by Katherine Mansfield, a thoughtful and engaging story that captures the delicate contrast between youth and adulthood. In this story, we follow a young girl and her older brother as they visit a refined hotel for tea with an older woman, who narrates the story. The young girl, still in her teenage years, is clearly out of place in the sophisticated world around her. While the adults try to maintain proper manners, she fidgets, plays with her food, and shows little interest in the elegant setting. Her behavior highlights the awkwardness of being caught between childhood and adulthood, where the carefree nature of youth clashes with the formal expectations of the adult world. As the narrator observes the young girl's discomfort, we see a deeper theme emerge: the bittersweet process of growing up and the tension that comes with trying to fit into a world that feels foreign. Mansfield's brilliant storytelling gives us a glimpse into the young girl's inner world, where she is not yet ready to leave behind the innocence of childhood but is expected to act like an adult. Stay with us till the end as we uncover the themes of innocence, social pressure, and the inevitable transition from youth to adulthood, all while improving your English comprehension through this beautifully written story. Let's dive into The Young Girl together. In her light blue dress, with her cheeks slightly flushed, her bright blue eyes, and her golden curls pinned up, Mrs. Raddick's daughter looked like she had just descended from the sky. Mrs. Raddick's timid but admiring glance suggested she believed it too. But her daughter didn't seem pleased. Why would she? She looked bored, as if the heavens were full of casinos, with old saints running the tables and crowns to gamble with. "You don't mind taking Henny, do you?" asked Mrs. Raddick, almost pleading. "Are you sure? The car's here, you'll have tea, and we'll meet back on this exact step in an hour. You see, I really want her to go in. She's never been before, and it's something she should experience. I'd feel guilty otherwise." "Oh, stop talking, Mother," the girl said with a sigh. "Come on, let's go. And close your bag, or you'll lose all your money again." "I'm sorry, darling," Mrs. Raddick murmured apologetically. "Oh, come on. I want to win some money," her daughter said impatiently. "You have it easy, but I'm broke. Here, take 50 francs. No, take 100. I saw Mrs. Raddick pushing the notes into her daughter's hand as they walked through the swing doors. Henny and I stayed on the steps for a moment, watching the people pass by. He had a wide, excited grin. "I say," he shouted, "look, there's an English bulldog. Are they allowed to bring dogs in there?" "No, they aren't. He's a great dog though, isn't he? I wish I had one. They scare people, but they're always nice to the ones they belong to." Suddenly, he squeezed my arm. "Look at that old lady. Who is she? Why does she look like that? Is she a gambler?" The woman he was staring at was old, dressed in a faded green satin gown with a black velvet cloak and a white hat adorned with purple feathers. She moved slowly, as though pulled by invisible wires, laughing and talking to herself. Her gnarled hands clutched a filthy-looking bag. Just then, Mrs. Raddick appeared again, with her daughter and another woman in the background. Mrs. Raddick rushed over, flushed and energized, like someone saying goodbye at a train station with only moments to spare before the train departs. "Oh good, you're still here. How lucky. I've had the worst time with her," she said, waving at her daughter, who stood completely still, twirling her foot on the step and looking distant. "They won't let her in. I swore she was 21, but they didn't believe me. I even showed the man my purse, but it didn't work. Then, I ran into Mrs. Maswan from New York, who just won $13,000 in the private room, and now she wants me to go back with her while she's still on a lucky streak. But, of course, I can't leave her. Unless—" At that moment, her daughter snapped out of her trance and glared at her mother. "Why can't you leave me?" she said angrily. "This is ridiculous. Don't make such a fuss. This is the last time I'm going out with you. You really are too much." Mrs. Raddick was visibly torn, desperate to go back with Mrs. Maswan, but equally desperate not to leave her daughter alone. I quickly stepped in. Do you want to come to tea with us?" Yes, she'll be happy to," Mrs. Raddick said eagerly. "That's exactly what I wanted, right, darling? I'll be back in an hour, or less." And with that, she hurried up the steps, her bag still wide open. So, it was just the three of us. Henny looked as miserable as I felt. When the car arrived, the girl wrapped her dark coat around her, as if to shield herself from us. Even her small feet seemed reluctant to carry her down the steps. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled as the car started moving. "Oh, it's fine," she replied dismissively. "I don't want to look 21. Who would, if they were 17? It's the stupidity I hate, and the way old men stare. Creeps." Henny stole a glance at her, then quickly turned to stare out of the window. We arrived at a massive palace, all pink and white marble, with orange trees planted in golden black tubs outside the doors. "Would you like to go inside?" I suggested. She hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose. There doesn't seem to be anywhere else to go. Get out, Henny." I went in first to find a table, and she followed reluctantly. But having her 12-year-old brother with us was definitely the final straw for her. We found one table, with pink carnations and pastel blue napkins shaped like little sails. "Shall we sit here?" She lazily rested her hand on the back of a wicker chair. "I suppose," she said flatly. Henny wriggled onto a stool at the end, looking out of place. She didn't even take off her gloves. Instead, she stared at the table, tapping her fingers, clearly irritated. When a violin started playing softly in the background, she winced. The waitress arrived. I barely dared to ask. "Tea? Coffee? Maybe iced tea with lemon?" She shrugged. "I don't care. It's all the same to me." Henny whispered, "Chocolate?" "Bring me a chocolate too," she said carelessly, just as the waitress turned away. While we waited, she took out a gold powder compact with a mirror in the lid, shook the puff as though she hated it, and dabbed her nose. "Henny," she said, without looking up, "take those flowers away. I quickly moved the carnations, realizing they had been bothering her the whole time. The waitress returned with our drinks. Henny, eager as ever, buried his face in his cup, only to emerge with a dollop of cream on his nose. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. I wondered if I should point out her cup, but she didn't seem to notice until she took a sip. She winced. "Ugh, so sweet," she said, disgusted. A small boy with a tray of pastries approached, offering us a selection of delicate, sugary treats. She waved him off, saying, "I'm not hungry. Take them away." Henny, however, gave me a quick look and selected a chocolate cream, a coffee éclair, a meringue filled with chestnut cream, and a tiny tart filled with strawberries. She watched him with a mix of amusement and horror. Then, at the last second, she held out her plate. "Fine, I'll have one," she said, pretending not to care. The server dropped 3 pastries onto her plate. "I don't know why you're giving me these," she muttered. "I'm not going to eat them." Finally, I felt comfortable enough to sip my tea. "Mind if I smoke?" I asked. She glanced at me, her eyes softening for the first time. "Of course. I always expect people to." Then, disaster struck. Henny poked his pastry too hard, and it collapsed in 2. Half of it fell onto the table, sending him into a bright red flush. His ears turned crimson as he hurriedly tried to clean up the mess. "You little beast," she muttered under her breath. I jumped in to save the situation. "So, how long will you be abroad?" I asked. But she had already forgotten about Henny and me. She was lost in her thoughts, staring off into the distance. "I don't know," she said quietly. "You must prefer this to London," I suggested. "It's more." When I trailed off, she looked at me, puzzled. "More?" "Brighter," I offered with a wave of my hand. She thought about it for a moment. "Well, that depends." Henny finished his treat, still a little embarrassed. I quickly changed the subject. "How about an ice cream, Henny? Maybe tangerine and ginger?" "No, something lighter, maybe pineapple cream." Henny agreed, and the waitress returned to take the order. "Did you say tangerine and ginger?" she asked. "I like ginger." "I'll have one too." Then, she frowned. "I wish that orchestra would stop playing these old songs. We danced to this one all last Christmas. It's getting annoying." I smiled. "I think it's a nice tune, don't you, Henny?" "Ripping," Henny exclaimed, his voice cracking unexpectedly. She finally looked around, as though noticing her surroundings for the first time. A well-dressed older man gazed at her through a monocle, but she didn't even seem to see him. Once we finished, she pulled on her gloves, struggling with her diamond wristwatch, which kept getting in the way. After a moment, she stood up abruptly, clearly eager to leave. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the first stars were visible. As we waited for the car, she stood on the steps, tapping her foot. Henny rushed forward to open the door, and she slid into the seat with a dramatic sigh. "Tell him to drive as fast as possible," she said wearily. Henny grinned at the chauffeur. "Alles vite," he called out, then settled into his seat opposite us. The gold powder box appeared again, and she gave herself a quick, secretive glance in the mirror as the car sped through the glittering streets. When we reached the casino, Mrs. Raddick was nowhere to be found. "Do you want to wait in the car?" I asked. "No," she replied quickly. "I'll wait on the steps." "I don't like leaving you alone," I protested. She turned to me, her eyes wide, her cheeks suddenly flushed. "I don't mind at all. I like waiting. Really, I do." For a moment, she looked as though she might cry, but then she smiled, almost shyly. "I love waiting. I'm always waiting, everywhere." As she stood on the steps in her dark coat, her pale neck and body in the blue dress looked like a flower, just beginning to bloom.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.